Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And I gather that the back is very popular, but there's actually a large number of open seats up front here. So feel free to move forward. My name is Rick Seiger. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives here at Carnegie Mellon, and I'm really pleased to be back in the Posner Center for a town hall meeting to talk about the strategic plan. Many of us were here over a dozen times through the fall and the spring, and so it's nice to be back here to talk about an update for where we are. So I'm hoping that this conversation today is very interactive. I'm going to start with a discussion of a few items that are sort of more presentational, but then I think hopefully we'll get into a much more interactive discussion. So here's what we'd like to do today. The welcome I just did. An update on process. I want to give you kind of a tour, real time actually, of the new website that is housing the strategic plan. And then I want to actually talk about implementation planning, and let's flip those two bullets, which I forgot to do in this presentation 5 minutes before. We'll talk about implementation planning quickly, and then actually get to questions and feedback more toward the end so we can allow a little bit more time. And then finally, I think Farnham Jahani and our provost will close us out with some inspirational words. So with that, let me get to an update on the process here. Here is a brief timeline of where we are. Obviously, today is the 24th. One thing I want to mention that's not on the slide is since this group last met, and not this group precisely, but since there were last really focused public outreach on the strategic plan via a town hall, I think the last one was April 14th of last year. The committees working in various areas of the plan, leadership of the university, have taken a really hard look at all these recommendations, all the strategies, all the kind of output that came out of the plan. We've massaged it, we've worked it in sort of late night meetings, countless hours, sort of behind the computer screen, working through things. And so that leads us to this point, where today we're doing an update for the campus. The full board of trustees is going to consider the plan for approval at their meeting at the end of October. And our hope, pending approval of the board, is for a launch in November. And of course, I would never show a timeline for this plan without implementation and this kind of living document idea sort of past the month of November of this year. And of course, we'll be refining the document on the website as we move into launch. I want to take you for a trip down memory lane here. Last year, last October actually, we sat in this room and Dr. Suresh said, here's a framework I want you to use for how to think about how we might build a strategy for the university. And we said there are three focus areas: transformative teaching and learning, transformative research, creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, and the transformative experience. And then there are all these cross-cutting areas, including diversity, including international, and many of the ones that you see up there. He said, this is a good way to organize your work. And so since October, we've taken a lot of strides in this direction, and we've moved from this to this. Here's the plan. So this is actually something I want to take a second. This is not intended for you to read it, of course. But this is a matrix of goals and recommendations that have flowed out of that broad set of focus areas and cross-cutting areas. Importantly, I was going to blow by this slide, and I had a meeting just a minute ago, and Michael Murphy said, you should talk about this slide for a second. Importantly, you can see here, across the top there are 12 broad goals, which we'll talk about in more specificity on the screen that you can actually read. And down the left, there are 24 specific strategic recommendations. And you'll note that the goals and recommendations are not siloed in sort of a linear way, but instead, there are many goals for which many strategies map to them, and many strategies that serve many goals. So you'll see a couple of examples of that as we go. But if you took something like learning science, for example, which we'll talk about in a minute, you could say that learning science is really important for teaching, it's really important for learning, it's really important for our international programs, it's really important to reach diverse populations, right? And so we've taken this matrix approach to the plan and gotten away from the sort of verticals and horizontals, although that is sort of a matrix approach, to do this. And so the way that we've taken this information and organized it then is slightly different. So we moved from the three focus areas and cross-cutters to answering three questions. What are our goals for our students, faculty, staff members, and alumni? Goals for the university community, and what impact we want to see societally. And so we've moved from these three pillars to more of a concentric circles model where there's the individual experience, the university community, and societal impact. This is not a major change in the content of the plan, more what we thought was a more powerful and easily understandable way to organize the content. And so in doing so, we thought that the best way to focus on it was in a web format and not in a static document. And I think that's the case for a bunch of different reasons. But actually, what I'd like to do now is just show you kind of a live test drive of the website with my fingers crossed for the technology here. So this is our website. This is a website that's on a staging server. It doesn't exist yet. It's sort of what I would call a cousin to the regular cmu.edu. And I want to point out a couple features and then actually walk you through it, right? And we can go through some content specifically. So as you'll see throughout the site, there are these three areas, the three concentric circles that we talked about on the masthead. And then in the upper right corner, there's an About page and a Contact page. The Contact page is just sort of a standard contact page. The About page is quite important. And then as you scroll down the site, on the front page, you see these goals for the experience, goals for the community, and goals for societal impact. Also on the front page, you're going to find spots for vision and mission and for values. The screen is giant, and so on many screens, the resolution is such that you sort of see all this in one place, and apologies for that. When you're here, you click Read More. It's the first thing you're going to see, and you get to a letter from Dr. Suresh. It talks about the process, it talks about the challenges that we face, and it's an aspirational sort of call to action. And then also within this About section, you have key areas, and I want to actually focus on 4 of these areas today because I think they're really important to the process and important to folks that have contributed. The first is vision and mission. You may recognize these from past Carnegie Mellon visions and missions. They haven't changed dramatically. We have reworded things, put a little bit of focus here, a little bit of focus there. But the reality is the vision and mission for this place doesn't change on the timescale of 10 years, right? We know what we're about. Secondly, our values. Similarly, our values haven't changed dramatically, although if you compare them to the 2008 plan, you'll note some different emphasis and a slightly different kind of casting of certain pieces. But there are key issues there, right? Dedication, impact, collaboration, integrity, sustainability, and many others. These are kind of core foundational principles for the plan. Most plans, I would say, have a value section, and probably worth noting that the folks writing the plan actually spent a particularly large amount of time in this area. I'll breeze by this previous plan section just to show you that there's a resource for the 1998 and the 2008 areas, and then I want to actually take some time on this planning process slide. So this is very meta. It's like you're kind of looking in the mirror for Posner Center here. But there's an overview of the process here that's really, really important, particularly for those of us who have been on the team here, so to speak, for a year. There's a little bit of narrative, but I'll show you the kind of visuals, right? So we've had more than 1,200 people participate in town hall meetings, in person and on the web. We've had over 125 suggestions, concrete suggestions, submitted through the website. We've had more than 100 meetings, believe it or not, many of which were actually conducted by the faculty, a subgroup under Todd and Scott Sanders' leadership. And we've had more than 160 folks on committees. It's a huge effort. And so then we get to the timeline. Folks may have seen this slide before. It's a slight modification, but you see all the milestones along the way from last October to today. And importantly, for those of us who've been involved in the process, we've archived all the presentations and all the webcasts for the entire process here. So you can go down and you can say, hey, I really had a great time at that February 17th research town hall. I would love to see myself on TV. The YouTube is here and accessible through this link. And then very importantly, back to the faculty working group, there is a section at the bottom for reports of the strategic planning committees. This is not entirely populated yet as the site is still in development, but there is a place where if different committees, and different committees are going to treat this differently, and that's totally fine, have a polished product that they want to show that sort of was the source document, if you will, that informed the broader plan. There's a prominent place for that to be. Right now we have the faculty working group up there for illustrative purposes, but there will certainly be others over time. And then finally, there's this super long page of acknowledgments just to give you a little illustration of how many people are on all these committees, right? Literally hundreds of folks have contributed to this. And that is sort of the, if you will, the about section here of the plan. So part of this is sort of vision, mission, and values, and part of it is what I would call the annotation of how we've done the work. The next thing I want to do is show you the content and how we've organized it, right? So you remember there's 3 concentric circles, and rather than click through all 12 goals and all 24 recommendations, what I'd like to do instead is show you some sample pathways through the site so you can sort of get a sense of how these things work together. And unlike sort of a PDF or a document that you can hold in your hand, our intention is to have you sort of choose your own adventure through the site. You'll be able to interact with the site in a much more dynamic way, see how these relationships between different goals and strategies work. and ultimately end up with a much richer experience than you would just reading a document. That's the goal. And again, we'd love your feedback on that today. So let's take the individual experience. So we have goals for the individual experience, and we've picked out 4. Deep disciplinary knowledge, leadership, communication, and interpersonal skills, knowing how to learn, and personal development, including physical and emotional well-being. So I'm just going to pick one of these. So let's check personal development. You'll see the site has this sort of slick functionality. It'll roll up to it. And then there's actually a goal statement, 1 sentence. Each of the 12 goals has a sentence. I'll let you take a look at that here for a minute. Folks who were a part of the process as we've gone, this will not be a surprise to you. This is certainly something that a lot of people focused on. And then under that goal, in this case, we have 7 strategic recommendations. Remember, there are a total of 24. So 7 of them, right, which is a pretty large percentage, map directly to this goal. So let's take holistic health and wellness, which is very directly related, and we'll go to that strategy. And then each strategic recommendation has its own page. And I'll let you take a look at this. I'm going to move fast. If people want me to slow down, please let me know, but I want to show functionality. And then at the end, in questions, if people have specific questions about specific items, like where was this, we can go back to it and kind of do a deep dive. But this is an example. So you see there's a broad goal statement, 1 sentence. When you say we're focusing on health and wellness, though, you'll see there's 4 actually fairly specific bullets, right? This is actually what we're going to do, right? We are going to develop a destination space where wellness is promoted through delivery of services, including health service. Like, these are concrete things that the university plans to do as part of the plan. Some universities go this deep, I would say. Some don't. They're much more kind of aspirational, high level. We made a very conscious decision to sort of outline exactly, in many cases, at a more specific level what we want to do. Importantly, this is not an implementation plan. It doesn't say how we're going to do it, how we're going to fund it. That is sort of later, and we'll talk about that later. But it is more specific, I would say, than most. Also importantly, you're looking at holistic health and wellness, and you note here that we got here through leadership, we got here actually through personal development, including physical and emotional health. But it also supports these 4 other goals. And so you can imagine saying, like, oh, that's interesting. I want to think about talent, and click on talent, and then you're at a different goal, which actually happens to be in the university community bucket. So I'll take us back to the home page for a second. We're on individual experience. Let's go to university community, which is our second bucket. And we have 5 goals here. And we have our little fence logo, which I think is really cool. Diverse and inclusive community, concentration of world-class talent, culture of interdisciplinary approaches to problem solving, interconnected network for research and creativity, and destination of choice for innovation and entrepreneurship. I'm going to take diverse and inclusive community here because I know there was an enormous amount of attention to that issue here, although, again, we can certainly go back at any point to any of these and take a deeper dive. I just sort of want to show you the functionality here. So diverse and inclusive community, succinct goal statement. This is what we want to do. This is our aspiration. And then this, you'll notice, because it's so important, actually has 13 of the strategic recommendations in the plan. So 13 out of 24 serve this goal. It shows you how important it is, and it shows you how sort of broad-based the impact of what we do is on it. And so from things to grand challenges to health and wellness, to scholarships and fellowships, to professional development for staff, those all impact a diverse community. But I want to take you to a specific recommendation on diversity just for information, best practices in diversity and inclusion, and let you take a moment to look at this. And as you'll see as I scroll down, it also maps to a large number of goals. So diversity is one of those cross-cutting areas that's very important across all these strategies and across many of the goals. And in fact, it maps to 6 or a full 1/2 of the goals directly. I mean, I think as we looked at the mapping as an aside, I mean, one could make arguments that everything maps to everything. We tried to sort of draw a reasonable line somewhere, but if there are comments on the mapping, that's certainly something easy to fix as well. In this case, we thought these were the 6 where it was really sort of the most hard-hitting, if you will. And then finally, the third big bucket, societal impact. Nice shot there. We have 3 goals: leadership and research and creativity, regional impact, engaging and impacting the global community. Let's take leadership and research and creativity here. And this is something that the formerly known as Focus Area 2 worked hard on: lead and be widely recognized for achieving excellence in research, advancing fundamental questions, etc. And here you'll find, again, a lot of interest here. There's 10 of these. And some of these you've seen before, right? Scholarships and fellowships. That's important for research. It's also important for diversity. It's also important for other things. And so here, let's take an ecology of infrastructure and support, because I think this is actually a very interesting recommendation that came out of this group. And I'll let folks take a minute with this as well. So the last thing I'll show you as we're kind of cruising through the site, and again, when it's sort of finalized and comes out, I would encourage you to take a lot of time cruising through, is this sort of inner linkages here. So if we have, take a destination of choice for innovation and entrepreneurship, and we say we want to engage alumni, and I'm going to come to this one for a particular reason, both because it's important and because it has some additional functionality on it, and because it has a great picture of Krishna. We see that we can sort of loop back and forth. So, oh, that's important to regional. You go back. It's important to innovation, and you can go back. And so you get to get this sense of sort of you can navigate yourself through the plan. There's not like a particular order of these things. The other thing I want to show you on the alumni in particular here. I mean, this is not going to be on the final plan, but as you scroll down, you'll notice that below the recommendation itself is an area for monitoring or reporting, right? And so this is obviously this is gibberish for a website and for illustrative purposes. You can see kind of a thermometer bar that would say, this is sort of progress we've made on this goal. There are a couple of other interesting sort of visualization tools that we're working on here that one could include on the strategy pages to do that, right? So one could imagine some language below there that says progress to date and 50% finished on this set of things or something like that. Important to note as we look into implementation. So that's the broad brush, kind of super fast tour through the website. I'm going to finish by saying a couple of words about implementation, and then really I would encourage you not just to ask questions about how the website works. This is different. Most people expect a plan to be in a document, and even in our peer websites, of which I've looked at many, most of them are sort of like on the website, but it's still like a really, really long document, just kind of on a bunch of web pages. This is a different way of presenting this material, and we hope people will respond to it and be engaged by it instead of just sort of reacting to it as you would as a word on the page, but would love feedback on that as well. And then specifically, if you have questions about particular item areas, right, like where did this end up in the plan, or we talked about this, I want to hear about it, I'll actually just moderate a Q&A among the folks on the strategic planning group in a minute, and I'll sort of mirror their comments with kind of a tour through the website as they sort of talk about our thought process on those things, if that makes sense. So let me hop back to the deck for just a second here. Did that work? Wow, amazing. Quick note on implementation planning. 4 things I just want to mention briefly, with the understanding that we're in the early stages, very early stages of going from visioning to implementation here. Again, it's important to get the campus community feedback. Today it's important to get board feedback, so we're a little bit just at the very, very front end of this process. Number 1, what I would call accountability and alignment, and I would add a third word to that, opportunity, right? So we need to hold folks accountable at senior levels and also throughout the organization for the things that we want to do here. But it's not just sort of a top-down exercise. In fact, it's not at all. It's aligning existing activities and new activities in different administrative units and different schools and colleges with how we plan to move forward. And it's also a great opportunity, and in fact, we won't be able to do this without engaging the full community, right? I mean, there are people with enormous expertise across this campus, across all these domains, that will be needed to sort of engage strongly to accomplish a lot of these goals. Second, sequencing. That's an interesting way of just saying there's a lot there, and we can't do it all at once, right? This is a 10-year plan designed to go to 2025. There's a prioritization process that needs to happen here. Many of the things that you've seen in the plan are happening already, actually. Some are not. Some are happening in one way, and we want to sort of change that way a little bit. And so as you go through the plan, and as we go through implementation, we'll need to sequence and figure out, what's now, what's later, and how do we move this through 2025. And this is a living document, both because it's very easy to edit on the web, but also because we need to constantly be re-examining how we're doing. There may be things that we think are terrific ideas right now that 2 years from now aren't the right thing for the university. And there may be things, I know there will be things 2 years from now that we think are terrific that we haven't thought of yet today. And so this idea of revisiting the document, of implementing in a dynamic way is really critically important. And then the fourth and final thing is just to focus on metrics. I'll say a brief word here. We want to use both existing metrics and new metrics to talk about where we are and where we want to go. And I think while process metrics are going to be important in some ways, for example, we want to implement a particular kind of training across the university, and the percentage of people that we train is really a process metric versus outcome metrics where we talk about sort of the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve by that training, are both going to be important here. And we need to look at metrics in a very careful way across these strategies to see what's most important, because as we all know, what gets measured gets done. Let me close there and move to this sort of moderated question and answer. Happy to, I assume I'll spend most of the time here on the website kind of clicking around, and there is a great turnout of deans, vice presidents, vice provosts who've been working really hard on the plan, who are eager to answer questions. And I think we can spend much of the rest of the time in discussion and then close it up with some comments from Farnham here. So with that, let me open the floor, and thank you again for coming. It's really, really terrific and encouraging turnout. Todd.
Just a quick operational question. Given the unusual format
Yes.
of the strategic plan, how is it going to be archived going forward?
Terrific question. Let me take a note on that. I mean, I think there is, the document was not written in HTML. So I have it, and so that's an excellent question that I don't know the answer to, but we can find out and make sure that it gets archived appropriately, for sure, yeah. Did not expect that question. Other questions? And again, if there are content-related questions specifically, I know I sort of buzzed through some examples, but there's a lot of content in here if people have specific things they want to ask about. Philip.
So one of the things that was talked about generally in committees was transparency of reporting and making sure that this is acted on. What's the plan for reporting out how we're doing quarterly or annually or making it visible to the community?
Do any of my colleagues want to take that? Do you want to?
Well, yeah, I'll give you my take on it. I think the plan should be, and this is still evolving, is first of all, this is going to be a living document, as you mentioned. We are going to put the implementation plan on the web. We're going to track it, and that's going to be accessible to everyone. One of the issues is how much of this becomes accessible to people outside CMU. This is really a big issue for any university that develops a strategic plan. So we may put password protected. It doesn't mean it becomes highly confidential. It's still available on the web with somebody with a password can get to it. But the metrics have to be accessible. Our priorities have to be essentially accessible. And to Rick's point, and I was going to say a word or two about this later, is that accountability is really important. One of the things that we've been discussing is that for a set of essentially short and intermediate actions, we're going to assign essentially someone on campus to be owner of that, if you will. And that becomes part of the living document that essentially we disclose to campus. It also does make sense, although we haven't made the decision. It does make sense for us every 6 months or year to go back and revisit essentially the strategic plan and say, what have we accomplished? Have we essentially been on track as far as the implementation is concerned? I think all of that is open. That was going to be discussed as part of our implementation plan. My expectation is that it's going to be a fairly transparent process, being sort of true to the way we have run the strategic plan to be as inclusive as possible. We didn't just assign 12 people to go write something and come back. Hopefully we can continue on that process. I don't know if anyone else on the management team or the deans have any thoughts on this.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm in alumni relations and annual giving, and I really like what I see so far. I like that it's not super high level and it has some specific goals and strategies along with that. And I see the work of my team reflected in what will become the metrics, but I'm wondering if maybe the very last slide that you show might address my question, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the metrics, because my team is just one small part of a very large operation that feeds up into the metrics of the strategic plan. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about those metrics and how are we going to know, because the alumni 25% line intrigued me, so how are we going to know when we're really 25% there, 50%
Right.
there, 100% there?
For what it's worth, total coincidence that functionality is illustrated on the alumni recommendation. We just picked one. I guess my take, and I would welcome others' views from the management team, is that actually individual strategies are going to have their own metrics. So the metric where we measure whether we're being effective for holistic health and wellness for students is very different than alumni engagement. That's a different set of things. But as you sort of work your way up the organization, there are going to be a set of core metrics that are actually relevant, across many of those things. I actually think for alumni there are some that may actually sort of be core metrics, but things like persistence or fundraising dollars or things of that nature that are really kind of overarching. But it's certainly the case that people that, in the case of alumni, there's actually a function at the university that does that will continue to do it, and in the colleges and schools. Those people, I think, will be responsible for, setting the right targets, establishing those metrics, and then managing to them, and reporting up on this sort of to be determined, but I think, transparent and relatively rigorous process that we're looking to put together and would really value help on sort of post-launch.
Yeah, Rick, I agree with that entirely, and I think, just as I speak for the Campus Affairs Group, so there's a lot of things we do within the Campus Affairs Group that are somewhat contained within that group, and we'll control many of the action items and set the metrics and whatnot. But I think for the cross-cutting things, and certainly alumni relations is a great example of that, that interplay, as Rick describes it, between the group setting their own metrics, and having the strong statement that, of course, you helped influence in the plan that this is a critical thing. So you'll help drive those metrics, and then again we'll have this cross-cutting. So there will be a vice president, a dean, someone who's responsible for the various strategies. Many of the strategies impact alumni, and we hope that intersection, rather than being confusing or complicated, or sort of help something like alumni and some of the metrics there not simply be sitting in the advancement group, right, but be more broadly throughout the institution. And I think in the discussion, I'm looking at my friend Jim Garrett there, who's done a lot in the alumni relations domain, as so many of the deans have. I think this allows for that both interplay in communicating and deciding, but also for tracking that progress.
And it sounds like, we're using alumni as an example now, that's just because that happens to be the office where I work, but take another smaller unit in a totally different department, it sounds like that's a very similar thing that would apply to that unit as well.
Yeah, and actually probably worth highlighting a second related strategy here that we didn't talk about, but just in the interest of, there's also this engaging parents and family members strategy, which we think is really important, related to alumni, not specifically alumni. A lot of resonance among folks involved in the process. And so we wanted to actually call this out specifically, meaningful engagement of parents and family. There may well be some related metrics between those two groups, but it's a different set of things, particularly for current parents versus kind of past parents. Don.
Rick, I love the dynamic nature of it versus the static nature. One question I have, having worked on the institutional master plan and in a lot of the things that are going on in the facilities improvement side of things, how will this plan interact with the institutional master plan on the implementation side? Because a lot of these things have space implications and program implications. What would be the interactivity of those?
I don't know if Jim or Gary wants to comment on the ecology of space idea. That's a really directly related one, and I can find it here.
Well, certainly, Don, the institutional master plan is you know, a governing document that, you know, if we're going to change it, we would have to be going to the city to get it approved again. And that's certainly always the case. But I would think that what we would be doing is looking within that master plan where there are opportunities to build spaces that would then be meeting the needs as specified in the plan. So if we're going to be trying to have this ecology of space, meaning, you know, flexible space for, you know, supporting research, supporting student innovation activity, that we're going to be looking for in our new building projects ways to, in fact, affect the strategic plan goals by, you know, planning the space in a way that meets those. So having this plan, it will be very helpful going forward as we're putting a lot of these different spaces in place, the TCS building, the new Gateway project, even some space that's yet to be programmed in the Tepper Quad. That's where the strategic plan and our goals can be addressed, and that's all done. Those buildings are all built within you know, the master plan.
I would add that this recommendation, if folks have had a chance to read it, I've had it up here for a couple of minutes, is pretty interesting. It's this ecology of space, but also infrastructure, right, for research and education. That's a new idea that was actually a very early and resoundingly adopted recommendation of the folks working in the research domain, which is a different kind of slice on what we do within the space, which is related, of course, to the master plan and things. So, Gina.
Add to that, Rick, that this is a great example that Don knows really well in the work on the Tepper Quad planning. When we look at holistic health and wellness, there has been a whole team that has helped guide consultants with the architects, as Don knows well, but others in the room don't, to look at how we can create spaces that support health and well-being of individuals. So there's the ecology and infrastructure that Rick has talked about, but there's also that cross-mapping to things as important as our individual health and well-being, and how we can build a space that both focuses from a sustainability standpoint in the infrastructure, but also on the individuals who inhabit and live and work and play in that building.
Thanks. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Bob Arkoff, and most people will know what I'm going to say now.
I'm ready.
So that I repeat myself. The physical, actual, existing buildings are the big challenges that we have to address, globally, nationally, regionally, and we have enormous problems because we consume much too much energy, we make much too much waste, and Carnegie Mellon in its strategic plan should say up front what the global and environmental issues are that will be addressed. And we have students from all over the world who come from different backgrounds in different countries, and all of them face these challenges but from a different perspective. So the physical infrastructure and the physical spaces and the inclusiveness of the community, the diversity, ecology of infrastructure, and so on, and the visualization of tools to actually visualize what is happening at Carnegie Mellon University from a point-by-point basis, and how that, what we are doing, addresses these global challenges and national and other challenges. And there are political issues and economic issues and even teaching issues. If we teach economics, we have to understand economics for what? Is it selling more cars? This is the way many industries are related. And I would recommend, if you would be interested, to look at the New York Times, an article written by the chairman of the board of Siemens, and says by 2020, we will reduce our CO2 emissions by 50%, and by 2030 by 100%, okay? And this is good business and good environmental policy, okay? So we should have goals like this at Carnegie Mellon University, and there are faculty on this campus that are able to address this. But we need to understand what the challenges and opportunities on a global basis are.
Richard, do you want to?
So I can't disagree with anything you said, and I think I would just point to, there's a place in the strategic plan in the teaching and learning goals that involve engaging the students in something exciting, interdisciplinary, involving grand societal challenges. So when we've talked about this to the faculty, they've been excited, and the topic that keeps coming to the surface as the most desirable is sustainability. So I think I'll be coming to you and other people to try to put together something exciting that the students can engage in and the faculty can contribute to get these issues out on the table and make them part of the education at CMU.
Right. And you can see that here. If you, yeah, you read the recommendation. Jim?
I'd also like to add, though, that I think Carnegie Mellon is already making a significant investment in what you're talking about, Volker. I know of at least 4 buildings where the buildings are being sensed extensively for energy usage and for all sorts of other environmental conditions, and Carnegie Mellon has been buying, energy that's more sustainable. So I think that, Carnegie Mellon has a posture already to be moving in that direction, and I think with these educational initiatives, we'll be able to take advantage of these investments that we already have.
But our ecological footprint is much too large compared to best practices elsewhere. And I'm not saying we're not doing anything. I'm not saying that at all. But the existing infrastructure, the existing buildings, the existing opportunities in water, waste, and energy are very significant.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
This has to do with the topic accountability and alignment. And you mentioned that the Board of Trustees will vote or approve the strategic plan. And I guess I'm wondering how much do you expect them to embrace themselves the strategic plan? So for example, there are many issues, many statements about diversity that we all recognize will help make this a better environment. I'm just wondering, as this goes up, does this also include the Board of Trustees?
I guess I'll take that one. Absolutely. Without any doubt, I think the expectation is that the Board of Trustees will embrace this. And by the way, they're not going to be surprised with the plan that they're going to see in October. In the same way that we have engaged the faculty, there have been at least 2 or 3 updates, including at a Board of Trustees retreat last year. Once we had the preliminary set of input from our faculty, and we could begin to see sort of the various forms and shapes of these recommendations, we ran several parallel brainstorming sessions, if you will, with our trustees. So they've been engaged. And I can tell you, there are a number of these issues that have been raised by our faculty and staff are the ones that directly resonate with our trustees. I fully expect that not only that they will embrace this, I expect that many of them may participate in the implementation of the strategic plan.
Other questions? We have plenty of time, so feel free to just ask about anything that we might. Yes, ma'am.
A question about just the functionality of the website. It's a choose-your-own-adventure kind of exploration through it. Will there be some guidance as well? People can certainly explore and take the paths they choose, but will there be ways to redirect or to get people back on the path that they might have gotten lost from through the website?
It's a really interesting question. We talked about some sort of primer, and I think, a web designer would tell you if you need a primer, you didn't build a very good website. But I guess the way I would look at it is, if you get to this front page, and obviously the draft will go away once it's not a draft, you're really pointed to this sort of read more button, and that gets you to this letter from the president, which actually explains to you how to use the site at a high level, right? So this particular part that I'll highlight, this part here that I'll highlight that you could look at, talks to you about it and talks that you can sort of work through each of the 3 areas. And so ideally when you get to that front page, this sort of everything is pointing you toward that button. It's sort of the framing. And then once you're into it, right, so you can click from here to wherever you want. I want to learn about the individual. And then you're here, and then this sort of left navigation kind of tells you where you are anywhere on the site. So if you're in community, again, you always have this navigation. You'll see as you scroll down, it stays with you. So it doesn't go up or down on the site. So that's sort of the functionality we built in, those sort of the nav. And then finally, the masthead is always the same from here up. You can search, there's a search bar that will search the site from anywhere. And then at the bottom, which we haven't seen much of, you can actually get anywhere on the site. So these kind of 10 categories on the left, and there's kind of a social media interactivity piece on the right. But it's a good point. I mean, this is a new way to present this kind of information, and so with that comes a little bit of worry that, is it going to work? We've done some user interface testing and things, but would welcome additional feedback. My personal take on this, and the reason we went in this direction, in addition to the fact that, kind of who reads something not online anymore, is really the interplay of the goals and strategies, right? If you did it as just a document, you would have to sort of pick winners and losers for these kind of really hard-hitting strategies. So you'd have to put diversity in a bucket that says diversity is for this reason. And when you put it on the web, we can say actually diversity serves these 13 strategies, right? Serve diversity because it's really, really important. And so we thought that the web was the best way to kind of communicate the linkages between these ideas. But I hear you. It's not. It takes a little bit of getting used to, and I'm really hopeful that it will accomplish that goal. So. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll just add that, I think part of what we hope to do between now and through the rollout is get a sense of people's comfort level. And we know that it's not, everybody will receive it slightly differently. We hope the majority of people will find it intuitive and easy to find their way through. For some people who don't spend a lot of time on the web, maybe this will feel a little unusual, and we're going to try to figure out what's the best way to support people who aren't as comfortable with this. But part of it is just getting in there and playing with it a little bit and seeing what people's reactions are. So we'd be interested in hearing.
Yeah. The last thing I'll mention, thank you very much, Steve, is on any website, if you click about, it's kind of like what's going on here. And in our case, when you click about, it's actually this letter, right? So we're pushing you to get to the letter first, or if you're confused, to the letter, because it does sort of tell you a little bit of a how-to guide, in addition to a bunch of aspirational language, which sort of frames the plan. Other questions?
Can I add a comment related
Yeah,
to the
sure.
website? Anytime you have these interlinked pages on a website, the challenge, you're absolutely right, is how do I make sense of the whole thing? And one way to think about this website, and I think Steve is right, we'll get feedback from you and we will update it, of course, is to think of it in the following terms. If you want a framework for understanding the website, the best way that I've been able to navigate it, including even the paper document, think of it as goals, strategies, and implementation. That's really it. It's about a set of goals, a set of strategies under each goal, and a set of implementation, essentially plans that are going to be under that. And then the rest of it is essentially connections between the different pages. So maybe there'll be a way for us to visualize that. We have actually experts on this campus who do research in this area who can help us, I'm sure. They're probably not in this room this afternoon, but we know where they work. So we can probably solicit their help in terms of in a concise way, visualizing it. Of course, you saw the way Rick visualized it, which was that matrix of 100 by 100, which is not exactly the representation that he wanted to show you. But we can work on it. I think there's a way to visualize this such that it's much more accessible to users.
That's a great point. I mean, this is like the smartest way we could think of to represent this 24 by 12 matrix with a bunch of other stuff like vision, mission, values in the process, right? So it actually is a direct reflection of that confusing looking matrix, just in a way that we hope is really easy to navigate.
Show the matrix again for a second.
Let's see here.
I'm sure you agree the website is a far improved version of this matrix. All right.
I'm going to go back to the website. Next question. Yes, sir.
Is this working?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my head sort of around, sort of down at the faculty level, and I had Al Newell saying early on when I was a first semester graduate student, you build a great university by getting really great people and giving them the resources to do things. And so I understand how the implementation will be sort of watched and implemented sort of down through executive teams, but being such a decentralized university, how does this sort of then sort of come down into the faculty, and like what should we know and what should we tell others, and how does this sort of impact from that direction?
Does someone want to?
Joe, let me take a crack, and then I think that the way you're going to see this implemented is not I definitely don't think it being implemented from the top down. This is going to be something that I, as Dean of the College of Engineering, am going to have responsibility for identifying the parts of this strategic plan that really have to be implemented at the college level or down at the department level, and then be doing things. We're already, I would hesitate to say, on a number of these issues related to search committees and you know, we're already, a number of colleges are acting on that as we speak, as we see the plan coming down. So the way it's going to get down to the faculty is that within your units there will be some activities that are definitely aligned with these strategies, and then the implementation and the metrics and the sort of percentage complete against that will be then rolled up from all the different units. So I think Rick said it earlier. This is a plan. Sorry. This is a plan where we all have to participate in making it happen. It can't just be top down. And so I think the faculty becoming familiar with the plan as much as I have to become familiar with the plan, as much as, you know, the vice presidents have to. It's important for us all.
Michael?
I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it's going to be a distributed activity, and the faculty will find many roles and opportunities to participate in helping to implement the plan.
Michael, and then
I agree entirely, and I think one of the most foundational critical reasons for that has been this process. So, you know, when I think, Joe, of what you do, and I think of the scan that through the strategic plan, and I think of the global awareness and the leadership development and community service and grand challenges and various things that very much are at the core, and not just that group, but very much at the core of the things you do. I think that's not coincidental, right? That's because the input into the plan was based on not everybody on the campus, but an enormous amount of people on the campus saying, this is what we care about, this is what we think is important. And I think Jim's manifestation as it plays out is exactly right. I mean, the beauty will be if, as people begin to populate this site with the activities and the successes and the failures, and we gauge those metrics, it'll actually be very celebrational, both because it affirms many of the things that we're already doing, and because it allows us to go a step further, to see connections maybe we didn't see across campus with other people working in the same domain. So I really think that that's the beauty of the plan, and I think the participation of people in this room and outside this room has made that so. So I hope everybody finds their place, because they help find their place in this plan.
Gary has a comment as well.
Yes, sir.
I just flip the query kind of on its head too, and if this works the way we envision it too, I think the idea is that the leadership, it's really implemented by the faculty, the staff, everyone. But at the end of the day, the leadership are there to help enable everyone to do it, to make things happen. And if there are barriers, it's the leadership's responsibility to figure out how to remove those barriers, how to provide incentives so that the strategic plan implementation occurs. And at the end of the day, the people that are going to be held accountable at the higher level are the ones, you know, that's the feedback mechanism to make sure that happens.
I think all of these comments are exactly right. I'll be even more blunt. If this strategic plan and the implementation of it is not embraced by our faculty staff, if they're not actively involved in it, I think it's dead on arrival. And it will just be some flowery language sitting on our website. So I think the only way this is going to work is if this is embraced by our faculty. I'll go even one step further. We'll have a bunch of, if you attended, I'm sure many of you did, some of the working group meetings that we had, in a number of them. You said 100 meetings plus, I think we've had. You'll notice that there were a lot of great ideas that came up that aren't necessarily going to make it into the strategic priority or a goal, because we viewed many of them are part of the implementation. Some of them are actually are going to be on the website. The goal is really to embrace all of those and over time prioritize them. And my expectation is that not only the deans and the department heads and the institute heads are going to be involved in prioritization, but our faculty staff are going to be involved in prioritization of those. Because that's the only way we're going to get the faculty staff to embrace the strategic plan. So to be very candid, I think will involve the faculty in prioritizing them. But Gary made really an important point, which is, let's suppose we come up with a strategic, one of the recommendations. I'm going to read one of them to you just to make it more concrete. Here's one strategic recommendation that is somewhere buried on this website, I'm sure. Support diversity and inclusion initiatives with appropriate resources and advance best practices. I know you're going to try to find it online.
Done.
Advance best
It's pretty
practices.
easy to navigate.
Oh, there you go. Here they go. Here it is. And advance best practices in recruiting from diverse population. And you see a set of ideas underneath it, which begin to sort of scratch the surface as far as implementation are concerned. I can tell you today that there are a bunch of related activities on campus that try to address the diversity and inclusion issues. And those involve our faculty, our staff. And to Gary's point, let's suppose that we move forward with enabling all of our search committees for faculty search, such that they're trained to understand unconscious biases that we have. They can get support and resources and best practices during the recruiting process. By the way, a lot of that is happening in a couple of colleges, and we're going to try to roll it out across the entire university. Let's suppose we embrace it, and everybody says, yep, we got to do this, and we do this. Our job is to resource it at the leadership level, and our job, as Gary said, is to remove barriers and make sure that implementation is successful. But at the end of the day, the actual implementation is going to be done by our faculty, but those who are involved in the search process.
Can I go to Todd and then to Holly?
Sure, I just wanted to comment as far as faculty input. In addition to the viewpoint coming down through the units, we also have the Faculty Senate as an organization, as another means or orthogonal direction of coming at this. And the Faculty Senate played a pretty
Todd, can
big
you,
role.
I'm sorry, can you use the mic?
Sure.
Yeah, yes, sir.
I just wanted to point out that the Faculty Senate played a pretty big role in terms of gathering information from the faculty perspective, and it's well reflected in the strategic plan so far. But there are action items that we can latch on to and we've identified already through this process, and as the full strategic plan is rolled out, I'm sure there'll be more that we can latch on to. So there's a number of directions that we can come at this.
Great.
Todd, how many
Oh,
working
sorry.
group meetings did you have?
I think Scott stopped counting at 26.
Amazing. Holly?
I was just going to make a comment related to accessing the plan, and I was wondering if there was a way to be able, a place where you could see all of the strategies. I think now one of the questions around feeling like it's top down is a need to access it via the goals. And you can get to the strategies, and then once you get to a strategy, you can find what other goals that strategy might enhance or support. But there isn't a place to access it via strategy, and it may feel more tangible for staff and faculty if you could really see the strategies and access the plan that way. So it's just a comment or a thought about ways that people might connect with the plan and have it feel more real to their work.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. There is actually currently on the website not that. And the reason was we felt like it was really important to stress that everything we said we were going to do at this sort of more concrete level was in service of something that we sort of aspire to be. But it's an interesting point. The other thing I would note is, like, when you're in a strategy, for example, this diversity strategy, you'll notice in the left nav it doesn't tell you what goal you're in or what sort of category you're in, because it actually, this one is like in all three. It shows you, it actually breaks it out by goal kind of at the bottom. But it's an interesting point. I mean, in some ways, like an unorganized list of 24 strategies may also be a little confusing. So let us take that back and think about it. It was a conscious decision, but I definitely take your point. So. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Just curious, is there a business case or series of business case assessing the costs of all of these goals and strategies?
No, not insofar as it goes. I mean, I think that
Depressing an activity.
Right. No. I mean, I think as you read through it, you see sort of an aspirational plan, and when we get to the implementation level, sort of post-launch, absolutely every group doing this implementation is going to need to have, finance folks and sort of be costing this stuff out. Also importantly though, some of this stuff actually doesn't cost that much, right? It's a way that we could either change or a way we do business in one way, or increase, particular things that we're already doing in other ways. it doesn't all have a huge price tag, but it's certainly the case that the sequencing question, what we do first, when we do it, over the course of this sort of 10-year period that the plan encompasses is going to be very much informed by resources. And I would also mention, and Gary, I'll get to you because I'm sure you have a good point. Oh, okay, great. The last thing I'd say is this is also, in some ways a roadmap for, how our leadership goes out and raises money against our top priorities. And so in some ways, it's sort of in and out, right? I mean, we want to be sort of articulating a vision for the university inward, but also outward, of which fundraising is a really key component. And you see that concretely in a couple strategies, alumni, parents, and things. But it's also, I would say, a really important sort of subtext or driver of the process. So, other questions? So it's 5:30.
We're deeply moved.
Yeah, thank you. So if no one else has further questions, and certainly I'm happy to sort of stay up here afterwards and cruise through the website and take questions one-on-one. And no one objects, I would be happy to close this meeting at 1 hour. Yes, sir.
The problem is I can't turn it off.
Yeah, no.
I tried cheating and actually using that URL, and it doesn't work. Is there a way that we can actually look at things on some private way?
Yeah, I think it's still kind of in development on a staging server, which may be part of the reason.
Given that, are we allowed to peek at it while it's still being staged, or is it not even ready for us to?
I think there's a couple of important tweaks to photography and a few things we want to make before we make it more public. But I'm happy to chat with you offline. I don't think pre kind of approval we're in a position to candidly just kind of like blast it out. And so that's the trickiness. I want to, part of the reason for this was actually to be very open about it, but in a way that was at least one step short of just kind of launching. But I would, feel free to come up here. We can figure something out for sure to make it work. Yes, sir.
So I actually have a question for you. Maybe I could answer. Since this is a living document, and since we do want to, we're going to be working to implement and have metrics, maybe we ought to consider going forward, and maybe you said this, I got here late, having eventually links that go to the exemplary places within the university where we are making a difference in various either goals supported strategies and so on, so that we can see the actual events as they unfold, if you will, or the history of how this is happening.
Gary, that is a terrific idea, and one example of the things that are still being tweaked along with photography with the website. So it's absolutely the case that our intention is to go through and link to kind of real-time activities in this domain. So one that just came to mind when we were sitting here is learning science. We could link to activities related to the Simon Initiative. There are a couple of programs, called out through here. I think there's a mention of Ideate, for example. We could link to that. There are a bunch of other exemplary places where we plan, to sort of link outside the strategic plan site. Importantly, this is like a micro thing, but sort of to a new tab. So you wouldn't go off the site. You would just sort of have a new window open up where you could explore. That's definitely a refinement we plan to make before launch. It's a great point. All right, Farna, why don't you close us out here?
Sure. Well, as Rick mentioned, a huge number of people contributed to this effort, and I also want to take a moment to thank Rick for all the hard work he's done behind the scenes. I assure you, managing a large number of people who've contributed to this process was not an easy task, and I think Rick brought every skill that he learned in Washington, D.C. To bear on this. So thanks again, Rick, for all of your hard work. So this is really developing very nicely. A couple of thoughts on this. The product of a strategic plan isn't intended to be a glossy document or a nice paper product with flowery language in it or happy talk in it. The process and the journey itself is just as important as the document that we produce. In fact, if you look at it, the real product of this is the conversations that have taken place on this campus over the last almost an entire year. The 12 goals that you see, the 24 strategic strategies, 24 or 26? 24 strategies. There was a point in time that I remember, we probably had 50, 60, 100 strategies, maybe even larger than that. But eventually they were distilled into these 12 goals and 24 strategies and a bunch of implementation, essentially ideas and plans that are coming together. But the outcome does reflect a very robust, honest and intense dialogue on campus, and a lot of soul searching in some ways that has taken place on this campus. I remember, this is now thinking back a year ago, remember in fact one of the very first meeting that Pillar 2 had, and it was repeated in all the pillars, was what makes CMU great? What makes CMU different? We've been enormously successful over the last couple of decades. This is really, truly a phenomenal institution. So people were stepping back and saying, well, what's the recipe? What has made this institution so great? And I was relatively new to campus, so that was actually incredibly helpful to me in terms of my own transition. But these were some deep questions that our colleagues were asking themselves. And it wasn't all about, oh, let's just pat ourselves on the back and say these are great things about us. It was also questions such as, what differentiates us from our peers, whether you're in drama school or in computer science or in your humanities? What differentiates us from our peers? And how do we maintain the momentum? How do we reach sort of the next level, if you will, without breaking it? Which is also an enormous responsibility for all of us, for the entire faculty, because all of us are building on the foundation that's been built over the last several decades, of course. Issues such as, I remember John Lahosky at one of these meetings was posing a question of, does our interest and appetite for interdisciplinary research, and I'm paraphrasing what John says, is happening at the expense of disciplinary expertise that we need to develop and have on campus. And statistics at the forefront of, as it turns out, interdisciplinary work on this campus. So there were a lot of tough questions that came up. And my message to you is, having sat through many of these meetings, is that the process and the journey is as important as the set of 10 or 12 goals and the 24 strategies that we've come up with. And the process is not over because, in fact, the hard part is now the implementation ideas, prioritization of them, although in Washington speak, he never called it prioritization, he called it sequencing. I thought that was clever. But prioritization of them, and also, as a number of you alluded to, how do we resource it? Because some of these implementation ideas, some of these strategic goals are going to require us to resource it at some significant level. The other point that I wanted to make, which has been made a couple of times already, is unlike, I have seen, honestly, I am personally very skeptical of strategic plans, and I came into it with some healthy skepticism, as many of you actually have, about developing sort of strategic plans. But what I really like about this strategic plan, it's really embracing, is the notion that Rick is to a large extent part responsible for, is to view the strategic plan, and Subra said that actually from day one, to view it as a living document. So not only we view it as a living document, but prioritization may change over time. And actions and implementations that are going to be sequenced, if you will, over the short term and intermediate term will change over time. So it's really important when it goes live for us not to look at it as, oh, wait a minute, that idea that I came up on February 22nd at 3 p.m. is not in the document. What we really need to look at it, some of us will say that, I'm sure, but the way we'll look at it is, as a living document, how do we enhance it, and how do we essentially build on what's there? And the final point related to this living document is that not only the content is going to be dynamic, but equally important, this notion of metrics that are going to be developed for our implementation plan, and then tracking those metrics and then holding ourselves, not just the leadership, but the entire campus, accountable to that, I think is really part of the contract that we have to put in place to make all of this successful. Again, with that, I'm personally excited about some of the ideas that have been formulated in our strategic plan. I look forward to working with all of you. And again, once again, I want to thank Rick, but also I want to thank all of you. Number of people in this room, including the Senate Working Group, have spent enormous amount of time formulating ideas, developing ideas, and then contributing to this process. Again, thank you, and I look forward to working with you on all of this. And again, congratulations, although this is not over, to all of you who have contributed to the process. This is for you. Meeting adjourned. All right.
Thanks.